Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to crack open the books on the endocrine system. Specifically, we're going to look at hormones.
Ah, yes, hormones, those tiny chemical messengers zipping around, controlling so much of what our bodies do.
Precisely. And our listeners are anatomy and physiology students, so they're already familiar with the basics, but
Right.
we're going to go deeper today, really explore how these hormones work their magic.
Sounds good.
So to kick things off, let's talk about the different types of hormones, because, not all hormones are created equal.
Absolutely. And one of the first things we look at is a hormone's chemical structure. It really is the key to understanding how it functions.
Okay, so it's like knowing what an ingredient is before you start cooking, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. You need to know what you're working with. So to get started, let's talk about those two main categories based on chemical structure, amino acid-based, and steroid hormones.
Right. And we know that most hormones fall into that first category, those amino acid-based hormones.
Right, and they come in a wide range of sizes. We've got simple ones like modified amino acids all the way to large, complex proteins.
So it's like a spectrum from like a single note to a whole symphony.
And importantly, most of these amino acid-based hormones are water-soluble.
Meaning they can easily travel through the bloodstream.
Exactly. They dissolve easily in the blood, so they're quick to reach their targets. Think of it like a message sent via instant messenger.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
But if they're water soluble, does that mean they can't pass through cell membranes easily? Because those membranes are mostly fat, right?
Excellent point. That's a key difference between amino acid-based hormones and those in the second category, steroid hormones. The steroid hormones are actually lipid-soluble.
So they can slip right through those cell membranes.
Exactly, because they're synthesized from cholesterol.
Okay, so steroid hormones are like those VIPs who can bypass the line and go straight to the backstage.
I like that. Now, because they can go through cell membranes, they generally work a little slower.
And I remember from A&P class that steroid hormones often work by influencing gene expression and protein synthesis. It's like a long-term project rather than a quick fix.
Perfect. Now, before we move on, we should mention one more group, those localized eicosanoids.
Right, like prostaglandins, which are biologically active, but they don't really fit the classic definition of a hormone because they're mostly localized.
Right, they kind of do their thing in a specific area. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about what happens when a hormone reaches its destination.
Right, because sending a signal is only half the story. Someone needs to receive it, right?
Exactly, and that's where target cells come into play.
So hormones, they're like those targeted ads we see online, right?
Yeah,
They only affect the cells with the right receptors.
yes. It's a lock and key system.
Uh-huh.
Only the right hormone key can unlock a specific receptor lock on a target cell.
And this is where it gets interesting, right? Because a single hormone can have different effects depending on the type of cell it binds to.
You got it. It all comes down to what the target cell is designed to do when that hormone binds to it.
It's like sending the same text message to different people. Everyone will react in their own way.
Exactly. Some might respond right away, others might save it for later, and some might just ignore it altogether.
So the same hormone can trigger different effects in different cells depending on what that cell is programmed to do.
Mhm.
Okay, that makes sense. But now I'm curious, if hormones are so powerful, what keeps them in check?
Ah, an excellent question. What triggers their release and what stops them? Well, there are three main ways that hormone release is regulated: humoral, neural, and hormonal stimuli.
3 ways, okay. Humoral, neural, and hormonal. Let's take those one at a time, starting with humoral stimuli. What's that all about?
So when we talk about humoral, we're talking about bodily fluids, especially the blood. Humoral stimuli basically means that hormone release is triggered by changes in the levels of specific substances in the blood.
So it's like our blood has built-in sensors that monitor different substances and tell glands when to release hormones to keep things balanced.
Perfect analogy, like a thermostat making sure the temperature is just right.
Exactly. Okay, so that's humoral. Now what about neural stimuli?
Neural stimuli is a bit more direct. That's when the nervous system steps in and directly tells a gland to release a hormone.
Ah, so the nervous system and the endocrine system are talking to each other. And I bet a classic example is our fight or flight response.
Exactly. When we sense danger, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in and sends a message to the adrenal medulla, which then releases adrenaline to get us ready for action.
So in this case, it's the brain calling the shots saying, hey, we need some adrenaline stat.
Precisely. And then we have hormonal stimuli, which, as you might guess, involves, well, other hormones.
So it's like a chain reaction, one hormone triggering the release of another.
Yes, and the best example is our hypothalamus and pituitary gland, which are the masterminds behind a lot of these hormonal cascades. They control the release of hormones from many other endocrine glands.
So it's not just about individual hormones doing their own thing, but rather a complex web of interactions between them.
Precisely, a hormonal dance, if you will. And that's why, to really understand the endocrine system, we need to look at how these hormones are triggered and how they work together.
Okay, so we've covered the types of hormones, their target cells, and how they're released. But what about the relationship between hormones and their receptors?
Great question. It's not quite as straightforward as you might think.
So it's not just a simple lock and key. What else is going on there?
Well, one thing to consider is the concentration of the hormone in the blood.
Okay, so the more hormone you have, the stronger the signal, like turning up the volume on a radio.
Exactly. But the receptors themselves also play a crucial role.
Okay, how so?
Well, cells can actually change the number of receptors they have for a particular hormone. So, if a cell is exposed to low levels of a hormone for a while, it might increase the number of receptors it has for that hormone. This is called upregulation.
So it's like the cell is saying, hey, I'm not getting enough of this signal. Let me turn up the volume by adding more receivers.
Exactly. And the opposite can happen too. If a cell is constantly bombarded with a hormone, it might reduce the number of receptors to avoid getting overstimulated. This is called downregulation.
Like turning down the volume to avoid being blasted by the signal. Clever. So cells can adjust their sensitivity to hormones depending on how much is out there.
Right, and there's another factor, the affinity of the hormone for its receptor.
Affinity.
It's basically how strongly a hormone binds to its receptor. A hormone with high affinity will have a greater effect even at low concentrations compared to one that binds weakly.
Okay, so it's like a handshake. A firm grip conveys a much stronger message than a weak one.
Exactly. And to make things even more complicated, some hormones can actually influence the receptors for other hormones.
Wait, really? So one hormone can mess with another hormone's ability to do its job?
You got it. For example, progesterone can actually reduce the number of receptors for estrogen in the uterus.
So it's like hormones are having their own little power struggles in the body. Wow, this is getting complicated.
Oh, and speaking of interactions, what happens when multiple hormones act on the same cell at the same time? That adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Oh, I bet. If hormones are already this complex on their own, I can only imagine what happens when they start interacting.
Well, it's not always a simple addition of effects. Sometimes the outcome is, well, surprising. Sometimes hormones amplify each other's effects, and sometimes they completely oppose each other.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Tell me more about these hormonal team-ups and rivalries.
Well, we can group these interactions into three main categories: permissiveness, synergism, and antagonism.
All right, let's unpack those one by one, starting with permissiveness. What does that even mean?
Think of it as one hormone giving permission to another hormone to do its job effectively, like a supporting role, setting the stage for the main act.
So it's not about one hormone directly causing an effect, but rather making it possible for another hormone to do its thing.
Exactly. A classic example is the relationship between thyroid hormone and those reproductive hormones. Reproductive hormones are essential for, well, reproduction, but they can't fully exert their effects without thyroid hormone being present.
Okay, so thyroid hormone is kind of like the stage manager, making sure everything is in place for those reproductive hormones to shine.
I love that. And then we have synergism, which is a bit more straightforward. This is when hormones team up and their combined effect is greater than the sum of their individual effects.
So they amplify each other, like 1 + 1 = 3.
Exactly. A great example is glucagon and epinephrine. Both of these hormones can raise blood sugar levels, but when they act together, the increase in blood sugar is much higher than if they acted alone.
Okay, so it's like a power couple, two forces combining to create a greater impact. Now, what about antagonism? Does that mean hormones are fighting each other?
You got it. Antagonism is when hormones have opposing effects. They're like two sides of a seesaw, pushing and pulling in opposite directions.
So it's like a tug of war, each hormone trying to pull the body in a different direction.
Exactly. And a perfect example of this is, you guessed it, insulin and glucagon. Insulin lowers blood sugar while glucagon raises it. They work in opposite directions to maintain that delicate balance.
So permissiveness is about enabling, synergism is about amplifying, and antagonism is about opposing. This is really starting to take a picture of how complex and interconnected the endocrine system is.
And we're just scratching the surface. It's not just about individual hormones doing their thing, but about this intricate web of interactions, a symphony of hormonal signals shaping so many aspects of our physiology.
It's incredible how much is happening behind the scenes to keep our bodies functioning properly.